You're listening to episode 29 of The Secular Buddhist. Welcome to The Secular Buddhist. I'm Ted Meissner. The Secular Buddhist is the podcast and website for modern, secular application of early Buddhist thought. The podcast has interviews and roundtable discussions pertaining to engaged Buddhist training and practice, and the companion website has show notes for each episode, along with resource materials on Buddhism, critical thinking, science, secularism, and skeptical thought. Though the podcast focuses on core practice from a secular viewpoint, more traditional teachings are welcome and openly discussed. Rick Bateman from SecularBuddhism.com speaks with us today about his work creating a secular Buddhist practice center in Victoria, British Columbia. Hi everyone. Before we get started with today's episode, I wanted to share with you a wonderful opportunity I had earlier this week. One of the great joys of doing this podcast is the outstanding people I get to interview. Well, that was topped on Tuesday night by the great good fortune of spending the evening chatting about secular Buddhism and a wide range of other topics with one of the listeners of the podcast. We'd exchanged emails over the past few months. Turned out we knew a few of the same people in the skeptic community, and we decided to get together for dinner when he was in Minneapolis for a few days. It was an enriching experience, heartwarming and humbling to meet someone who's getting something of positive value from this wee tiny small podcast. This is what it's about. Bridge building, networking, mutual support in our learning and for our practice. And I'm not really able to adequately describe how light and joyful this direct experience has made me feel, but it's exactly the quality of mind that I'm bringing to the cushion in meditation, stabilizing it, and then running it through its paces off the cushion. So, you know who you are. Thank you. The whole of this practice is good friends. Thank you all. And that leads quite nicely into today's episode with Rick Bateman. Rick is the founder of the website SecularBuddhism.com and the organizer of the Victoria, British Columbia Secular Buddhist Meetup.com group. He is actively striving to form a non-profit organization for secular Buddhism and currently teaches the Buddhism for Beginners course he developed in Victoria, British Columbia. He is an experienced instructor, having taught a variety of technical courses at Camosun College's continuing education program for 3 years. He has served as Vice President of Human Resources and Operations at an online learning company and is currently the Director of Operations for a local software company. He's also simply delightful to speak with, and I encourage you to make a point of visiting his website and checking out the latest developments. So, sit back, relax, and have a nice honeybush tea. It really does taste like honey. And I am speaking with Rick Bateman. Rick, thanks so much for being here.
Hi, Ted. It's great to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, very glad to. I was very eager in some of my searchings on the web, which I periodically am known to do, curious mind that I have, on secular Buddhism, and I found your site, which for the people who are listening to this on iTunes in particular, if you go to SecularBuddhism.com, I believe is the website address. Is that right, Rick?
Yes, that's right.
Then you will find a web page that is titled Secular Buddhism. No robes, no ritual, no religion. And Rick, what I'd like you to do is tell us a little bit about how you came to have a Buddhist practice and how that evolved into having a secular Buddhist practice.
Yeah, a friend of mine invited me to the group that she met with. She was a member of a Rinzai Zen temple here in Victoria. And she found out I was interested in Buddhism, and she just invited me to one of their meetings. And so I dropped in, found it interesting. I had a long history of an interest in things like psychology and philosophy and humanities in general. And so I found this Buddhism intriguing, and I continued to go to that group for probably the better part of a year. And And then after that, I found it was not quite meeting all my personal interests.
I had the same experience, yes.
Yeah. And I guess I wasn't really sure exactly how to put my finger on it at the time, although just about 10 years later I was able to. And so I basically started practicing independently and doing a lot of reading. During the past 10 years, I also belonged to a Soto Zen group for a period. And I'm currently involved in a Vipassana study group, where I meet with my Dharma study buddy once a week, and and then once a month we meet with a Vipassana teacher who comes here to the island to teach us and practice the Eightfold Path. So I like to keep involved in other groups just to check them out, to find out what their individual doctrine and practice is all about. And then as the years went by, I began to sort of close in on what it was about these other groups that was not really meeting my personal needs and interests, and decided, then just over the past 2 years, I really deepened my study and practice. And then over the past, most of this year, I guess it was, I really realized that what I was interested in was, Buddhism as originally taught by the Buddha, rather than the kind of Buddhism that had a great deal of other things added onto it. And I also realized that part of my challenge was with the ideas of rebirth, the ideas around rebirth, and all of the things that are associated necessarily with that. And I then started putting together a course. Having been a teacher, a continuing ed teacher here at the local college for 3 years, which means you teach adults in evenings and weekends, I realized that nowhere here was I able to find anywhere where they actually taught Buddhism. They didn't teach the 4 foundations of mindfulness. They didn't teach the Eightfold Path, etc. And so since I had a teaching background, I decided what I wanted to do was put together a course. And so I did that over a period of about 3 or 4 months, and then I taught it once so far, just on my own. I just rent a space in a local church, and then I deliver the course over the matter of 5 or 6 weeks, a couple of evenings a night, or a week rather. And then I guess it was during that process that I came up with the idea that I could just start my own Buddhist.
Why not? You could do that.
Yeah, I think it was because of my really necessarily deep studies in order to be able to teach Buddhism. Because you have to be having 3 years experience teaching adults. You have to be able to answer all their pop quiz questions, and they can be very challenging, those questions. And if you don't know your stuff, you're in hot water. So I think it was the process of putting together that course and then teaching it enabled me to feel comfortable saying, you know what, I could just start a secular Buddhism group. I don't need to do this through anybody or with any other organization. And so that led me to the idea of starting the meetup group and finding a space and just showing up.
Now, one of the things I had noticed, and I chatted about this briefly, is that on your website, one of the links is definition.
Yes.
You have a number of points there about secular Buddhism, and the thing that most appealed to me about that is towards the bottom, you have in addition, secular Buddhism can be further characterized as follows, and kind of gives a few of the qualities of secular Buddhism. And you mention things like it's therapeutic, it's directed specifically at the lessening of human suffering, it's psychological, it focuses on the human condition, it's scientific, it's based on the natural laws of cause and effect, it's pragmatic, it is defined by its usefulness alone, and most important, this stood out to me in particular, is it's empirical. Personal experience and direct validation are the only authority. And for those of us who are familiar with the Kalama Sutta, which many people listening to the podcast are, of course, that's one we as secular Buddhists find to be particularly relevant to us because it's a view of skepticism and critical thinking that you really need to do this by your own direct experience. Do you find that that's a challenging concept to convey with people who are new to looking at Buddhism from a secular viewpoint?
It certainly is challenging. Actually, communicating Buddhism from a secular Buddhism, I'm finding is much more challenging than most traditional teachers would ever find it. I find it challenging, the whole thing challenging to communicate, simply because without sitting there being a ancient Asian person in robes, with all the accoutrements of religious authority, the members of my group are much more willing to challenge what I say and to grill me.
For good or ill, yeah.
Oh, yeah. So once again, I really have to know my stuff and be prepared. So it's not just me sitting there communicating this and then everybody just accepts it. So in that regard, it's challenging. However, in regard to the idea that you need no authority outside of yourself, I think the people who are attracted to what I'm offering, they're very attracted to that to begin with. And so the actual idea is no challenge at all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that you also have on this same page is that about secular Buddhism recognizing no authority outside of oneself. There's no lineage or priesthood or titles. But you finish that one, and this is one of the things I particularly like, respect, yes, but not authority. And that's one of the things that we're finding in some of our discussions, and not just in this particular line of topics, but in our interfaith dialogues or conversations with each other on secular topics with which we may disagree, or people from completely other traditions, is that we're trying to simply convey that there is another way of looking at this. It can be more welcoming for people who may not gel as well with a traditional view of a religious framework of Buddhism, and there's nothing wrong with that practice in itself. It works very well for some people. Mm-hmm. That's one of the things that we want to make sure we're doing is building bridges and communicating. And so it's nice to see that there is that line of communication. Now, you'd also mentioned a meetup group, and I see Victorious Secular Buddhists is also linked here on Meetup. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the Meetup group, I've used Meetup. I've organized quite a few things over the years, and so I was already well aware of Meetup and its functionality, and also having a background in information technology. I knew what choices there were and what flavors there were out there, and I knew that Meetup would serve the purposes of organizing a group very well. So, and I also knew that people already come to Meetup looking for these kind of things, and so it was just based on what I knew so far, I knew that Meetup would be a good choice. Now, it for a person to run a Meetup group, they're not free. They do cost, I can't remember, it's somewhere between $12 and $17, I think, a month to run up to three Meetup groups. But of course, and so there is a little bit of expense there, but I do request donations whenever people come to the meetings. And so those donations help pay for the space, and they help also pay for the meetup price as well.
Excellent. And I see on the page itself, one of the things I like the way you've set it up is looking at that meetup for Victorious Secular Buddhists, is that you start right away with a welcome, and this is a non-denominational secular Buddhist group, and you describe what it is right away, so there's absolutely no confusion about what this particular meetup group is about.
Yes.
And one of the things I've liked about Meetup is people who are interested in Buddhism or meditation or that kind of practice have, within Meetup, they check boxes saying, send me notifications of groups in my area that do this. And so they'll find out about it. And one of the, I did join this group, even though I'm hoping to get there. It'll be terrific. It's not really close to me, but I'm hoping to be there.
Yeah.
And I see we're a couple other members of the Secular Buddhist podcast Facebook fan page are also there. I see you've got Archeon. Andy is a friend of ours who's also joined. And it's nice to have that participation and support for this kind of movement. And I know that Andy is also considering starting his own meetup group for secular Buddhism. So I think we are starting to see the beginnings of a movement and a more organized energy around kind of carving out our own niche and our own kind of practice. Where do you see this going in the next few years?
Well, I do think that secular Buddhism's time has sort of come for a variety of reasons, and I personally would like to see it become sort of one of the choices that people have in most areas, just like they can choose to go to a Theravada Vipassana group or a Mahayana Tibetan group or a Japanese Zen group. Those being the main ones for Westerners. I'd like it to get to the point where in most regions there's also a secular Buddhist group going, and that provides them with another choice. And I'd also like to see secular Buddhist groups proliferate. And one of the things I'd like to provide is a sort of a basis to help get them going, which is one of the things I'm trying to do with the secularbuddhism.com site and also with the meetup site, so that folks like, as you were mentioning, the individual from California,
Andy Hagel,
Andy, so that they can look at something like what I've set up and say, hey, I could do that, and it provides some kind of guidelines or structure or straw man, whatever you want to call it, for other groups to say, okay, well, we can do this here, and we can either adopt this definition or we can use it to draft our own. In my business career, I've often found it very helpful to put forward documents like this, so that people then respond, with their own input. Somebody has to sort of do that organizational work, and since I'm just naturally so inclined, I'm quite happy to do that. I'm also looking at starting setting up a society. I'm not sure whether I'm going to do that a BC society or a Canada society, et cetera. There's a few choices and decisions to be made there, but also doing that for the same reason, that other people have some sort of something to get them started with.
I agree, and this is something that Steve Batchelor and I have also discussed, and that you and I have chatted about, is that we may, at the very least, end up having different organizations in different countries. There may be one, I'm in the process of setting one up that may be for the United States, and you've got one for Canada, and whether there are really international groups in other continents that have their own. We still have a very common thread in our interpretation, and what I envision is very much in alignment, and you and I have chatted about this before, that it would be nice for us to have, and a number of people write in from the website for the Secular Buddhist podcast, that they would like to see, are there events that are specifically secular Buddhist in nature. And what I would like to see is, within the next couple of years, we have a conference or something that's over a longish weekend, and we have people coming in from different parts, and we have a number of different speakers that address issues that are of interest to a secular Buddhist audience.
I kind of have the same vision myself. I'd like to see secular Buddhism eventually doing all the things that the traditional groups in North America currently do, which is they have events, they have courses, those kind of things. I'd very much like to see it go that way. I really don't think that there'll be a problem based on my own experience here. Not sure if you're aware of it, but where I live on an island off the west coast of Canada. The total population of the metropolitan area here in Victoria is about 300,000. And I've already had what I consider reasonable success based on my history of starting groups, people showing up at my meetup group. And well, let me just give you a little bit of background there. For one of the main groups I ran in the past was a group I called Social Circles, which is separate from the American group. But I set it up and I ran it for 2 years here, and it was based on the idea that people need social connection just like they need air, food, and water in order to stay mentally and physically healthy. And my strategy there was very simple. I put up a website, I put forth, the sort of the idea, and then I started scheduling events, and I just showed up. And I was perfectly willing to be the only person who showed up for as long as it took. But, that never happened. There was always somebody else showed up. And within just under 2 years, I had 50 members. And we were doing 2 or 3 events per week. So I'm sort of convinced that that's all that's really going to be required for the same thing for my secular Buddhism group here in Victoria. And I would pass that along to your listeners is just, if you're the kind of person that's comfortable doing so, is just start the group, use a meetup because it doesn't require any IT skills or anything, so anybody can do it. Use a meetup group, you need to find the space, and then just start showing up. And I think the key is in the showing up, and of course,
consistency. Consistency
yes,
helps.
It is, and of course, communicating in some way, to locally. The second thing I'll say is, based on a little population of 300,000 on an island, and we're actually, I do a lot of studies into, just personal studies into demographics and psychographics and things like that, and we're kind of a conservative population up here. And I actually think if you start secular Buddhism groups in the United States with their urban centers, metropolitan regions that have population bases in the millions, I think anybody who does that will have a going concern very, very fast.
Yeah, I have on the Facebook fan page for the Secular Buddhist podcast, one of the discussions that was started as "Where's a deep agnostic to find a sangha?" And then another is Secular Buddhism Organization brainstorming, and we've had some wonderful conversations there about here are some ideas going forward on what our guiding principles would be. Call them that. Mm-hmm. And we've also had some in those very good conversations, there have been ideas and encouragement for people to start their own groups. And what I'd like to do is for people who are listening to the podcast, who've heard the recent episodes, Earl Frank Rectanus is a gentleman we've recently had on the podcast who has also been participating in their own, it's not a meetup group, they've had their own secular Buddhist group for a couple of years now. And Rick, you're starting yours. You've had yours going for a while, and as you've said, it's a relatively 300,000. It sounds like a lot. I can't wait to have that many listeners to the podcast. But in terms of a physical number of bodies to show up to a particular meetup, that's a relatively small amount. So for those of you who are in larger cities, even Bible Belt cities, it's something for you to consider. And I'd ask that if you are going to, I will be adding a directory to the secularbuddhist.com site where you'll be able to see links to places like this group in Victoria and other meetup groups that are started. And let us know. So do write in. Go to the contact page and hit the button and tell us about it. Or join us on the Facebook fan page and tell us what your experiences are as you're starting. So Rick, as I take a look, I see there's also a blog here on your secularbuddhism.com site. You've got a couple articles about there. Would you like to tell about some of the experiences you've had with that?
Yeah, well, I also decided I wanted communication for me because of sort of the vision I have. I'm quite aware, also because of my business background, I'm quite aware that communication will be critical for me to be successful locally. And I do want to be a part of not just a local phenomenon, but part of something much larger, North America wide. And so I'm aware that communication will be a key component of that. And so one of the things I decided to do was to join the lifeasahuman.com site and basically post blogs there. I'm required to post 2 or more per month, but and that's what I've been doing so far, but I'll be increasing that. And the reason to that is that it goes out to a fairly large audience. You know, I did choose the site with some thought. It goes out to a fairly large audience. It's got a lot of potential. I'm impressed with the people behind it. I actually know them. And by writing on that site, I'm able to get the message out to a much larger audience probably than just about any other way that I could do so on my own. So they're comfortable with me writing consistently about Buddhism or secular Buddhism, and that's my intention, is to just keep writing posts there on a regular basis, largely about secular Buddhism, and as a way of getting the word out. So that's what I'm doing there.
And I see there's a link that I've just added to the Facebook fan page for the podcast, Buddhism as Technology.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about that article.
Sure. Well, as I've been involved in Buddhism myself, I happen to be I'm a creative individual, but I'm also a highly analytical individual. For your listeners who might be into Myers-Briggs personality types, I'm what's called an INTJ. And a lot of people which are very analytical kind of people. A lot of And as I looked at Buddhism, I realized, Buddhism is the kind of people, when I read authors who have written about Buddhism, or even when I read the Buddha's original writings, it's very analytical. I would say Buddha was very much an analyst in terms of his, whether you want to say that's about technology or about psychology.
Yeah, absolutely. The structure of the suttas reveals a high degree of analytical organization.
Exactly. So one of the things because I've spent my working career in the high-tech or information technology field, I realized that Buddhism would actually appeal a lot to people who were technologists. And a lot of people who are technologists also tend to be, let's call it, non-theistic. Because, of course, when they apply their analytical minds to the issue, it doesn't add up.
That has sometimes been the case, not always.
Not always,
and
no.
One of the things we do want to make sure that we stress here is that I had also just linked Phil Plate's talk, Don't Be a Dick, in which we want to be welcoming and inclusive. So when we do have views like this, it doesn't mean that we're always right. It doesn't mean that it applies to everybody. Yeah.
No. And I necessarily am generalizing.
Yeah. Yep.
But so it just occurred to me that I could sort of explain Buddhism to the readers who were technically inclined, and maybe have them see it in a new light.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Excellent. Rick, is there anything else you'd like to share before we wrap up today's podcast?
No, I think that's great, Ted. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I hope to participate further in this initiative with you going forward.
Very, very glad to. Thanks so much for being here. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the companion website at www.thesecularbuddhist.com, and you'll find an entire web page devoted to this and every episode. There are also links to discussions about today's topic on the Secular Buddhist Facebook fan page. The music for the Secular Buddhist is used by permission from John Kaizan Neptune's CD, Steps in Time. Additional music is provided courtesy of Monty Levinson of Taihei Shakuhachi and Rodrigo Rodriguez. Their websites are linked on the Secular Buddhist on the About Music page. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on The Secular Buddhist.